Patriots Beat podcast here on the CLNS Media Podcast Network and on Patriots Press Pass on YouTube. And Alex, news that we knew was coming, but still doesn't make it any easier to swallow if you're a Patriots fan. J.C. Jackson just announced in this last hour that he has signed with the Los Angeles,
but still doesn't make it any easier to swallow.
And I got stuff going on in the background.
God, you can't help but listen to you live for the sound of your own voice that much.
It's a long day, all right? A 5-year, $82.5 million deal for J.C. Jackson with the Los Angeles Chargers, getting the bag indeed, $40 million guaranteed, $26 million signing bonus from the Chargers. Now, on the surface, I understand that people take this deal and they say 82.5 divided by 5 is only like $16.5 million per year. That's not that much for J.C. Jackson, but you have to look at the way that the contract pays him out in the first couple of years. $40 million guaranteed in the first 2 seasons fully. He's walking away after the first 2 years with $40 million. After the third season, he's walking away with $54 million. So I reported earlier today that the best offer I heard the Patriots made around the combine, which J.C. Jackson corroborated with Phil Perry just now, that is when the Patriots made their offer, was a 3-year, $51 million deal. 3 years worth a total value of $51 million. So we're getting a little too caught up in the APYs. The Patriots were never close to making an offer as big as what the Chargers gave J.C. Jackson here today. And that right there is just what it all, kind of sums it all up. The Patriots were never going to go here, Alex. They were never going to go this big with J.C. Jackson, and he moves on to the Chargers. And now the Patriots have some work to do in their secondary.
Yeah, and you go back to, if people want to be mad at the team, I don't know that today is what you're mad about. I think you go back to them not using the franchise tag and either making sure you keep them for one more year or trying to work on that, long-term deal. Yeah, no, they've got their work cut out for them. Again, it was something we all thought would happen. They've kind of been behind the 8 ball at cornerback. This is multiple years coming. This isn't just out of nowhere. If you're surprised suddenly that they're short at corner, you really haven't been following along, but this becomes a theme. I published my Patriots' biggest needs this morning before everything started. I have cornerback listed first. I also have cornerback listed third. Boundary corner specifically. It's that kind of situation. And we talked about this a little bit before. They're in a spot with Hightower and Bentley also pending free agents. They either have the option to or might have to, depending on how you look at it, overhaul not just their defensive personnel, but their defensive scheme, right? You need a certain kind of corner to play the way the Patriots want to play New England. Those guys aren't necessarily readily available. Last year, right, when you had at least one guy, you can kind of fudge it on the other side. They don't have the one guy now. They really, like, Jalen Mills, a nice player, but he's not that's not the style he plays. So it's either, they got to find a couple of man corners or find a bunch of zone corners and rotate. But this is now free agency, the draft. They're going to have to hit on a UDFA. I mean, they got their work cut out for them at the cornerback spot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's worth mentioning. I understand that right now it feels like the sky is falling on the Patriots and J.C. Jackson's gone, one of your best young players. But we're at 6 o'clock right now on the first day of the legal tampering period. Right. There's a long, long way to go.
Let me say it, because I see that we're doing the sky is falling thing. And, thanks a lot, Bill. And, I don't know how I'm going to watch this team. I think a lot of people forgot after last year what this is like, right? We've been down this road. We've been through this years and years. Day one of free agency was just woe and misery, and they were able to figure it out. Why aren't they spending like last year? They showed they'd spend. Now they won't. The Patriots always spend right up to the cap. The difference is last year they had historic cap space because they had so much dead money coming off the books from 2020. This isn't any different than anything they've done for the last 20 years. This is still pretty much to this point by the book. That doesn't mean it's good, but it's nothing out of the ordinary so far.
Yeah, really, this is not any surprise to anybody. Us, the Patriots, nobody. When the Patriots made that offer to J.C. Jackson in the beginning of March, they knew, and I reported last week, that they were never close to a deal. That they knew that they were worlds apart from where they were going to be able to bridge that gap. So the Pats have been planning for a while now, moving on from J.C. Jackson. So there's definitely some sort of plan in place now moving forward. I would definitely make the argument, if you wanted to, that maybe this was a last year problem that they didn't really foresee happening, and they end up bringing back JC on that second round tender instead of extending him potentially last offseason. I know that they tried to make an offer to him in season during the 2021 campaign, and Jackson just said, this isn't close right now. Let's talk about this after the season. So I just think that there has to be a plan in place, and if there's not, then we can react to that accordingly. Right now, you mentioned potentially a philosophical change of where this defense is going. Carlton Davis and JC Jackson Davis going back to Tampa Bay, Jackson going to the Chargers are the two big dominoes to fall in the cornerback market. So now we're going to start to see the rest of this cornerback market start to fill in. Now, I think the Patriots are going to be in the market for a veteran corner. Obviously, it's not going to be at the price point that J.C. Jackson was, but somebody like I threw out this morning in Darius Williams from the Rams, who does have a lot of experience and exposures to zone coverages. So maybe that does tell you that they're pointed in more that direction. I think he's a potential add for them. Somebody like Kyle Fuller now I think becomes a little bit more of a realistic possibility. We've talked about James Bradberry or trading for James Bradberry in the past. Now, I think they're going to turn their attention to those lower price points, try to get some value at that cornerback spot, and essentially add another Jalen Mills-like player, and so that they can go into the draft, hopefully draft somebody with some higher upside then, and then go about it that way. I want to talk about the zone thing in a second, but what do you think about the rest of this cornerback market, and who is somebody that you have your eye on that you wouldn't mind seeing them obviously make a fair offer to, somebody that's a realistic possibility?
I don't even know at this point. I mean, it's not like you can't replace JC Jackson thing. This is outside of Jackson and Davis, just a really weak market. And that's why I'm surprised. I like you kind of laid it out there. Jackson's deal is worth more than it ultimately looks on paper. It's not as shockingly below market as maybe it felt at first. I'm still surprised, especially with the way the wide receiver market is just absolutely popping off. I'm still surprised he ended up getting more of that just compared to what else is out there. Again, behind him and Davis, I'd like to say Stephon Gilmore. In theory, Stephon Gilmore is the right guy for this situation on a one-year deal. Who knows what the hell that situation is, though. Darius Williams is somebody you've brought up. Charvarius Ward. I don't hate the idea of Joe Hayden on a one-year deal, and then, you put a kid next to him like Booth or Elam, like an investment, right? I don't, as much as I've been talking about it, because I think it's something that's worth a talking point. I wouldn't go to zone. I wouldn't go to zone. I wouldn't do that. Even if that's maybe easier in the short term, there's a reason it's easier to get zone corners. There's a reason it's easier to play zone defense. I still want to see them try to pursue man corners. I think you go 1 year veteran, you go with a kid, and then you revisit. And Bradberry's interesting too. I didn't say Bradberry because I was looking at the list of free agents. Bradberry, I'm not exactly sure what his value is on the trade market. I won't give up a top 100 pick for him, but you get him for a day 3 pick, fine, whatever, right? But I would go veteran corner, first round pick, top 50 pick, pair them, and then revisit next year. I think it's not necessarily a good situation, but I think that's the best thing you can do in this spot. Like, this is where they are.
Right. So it's interesting.
They're not getting Stingley. He's not falling. If they can get Stingley, awesome. If they get Stingley, that's great. I think the kid's going to be a freaking stud. It's not happening.
Stop. So the one thing that I would say is, you mentioned Tredavious Ward. There we go. J.C. Jackson's number on an average annual basis didn't come in at the $20 million mark that we thought it might. I thought that deal with the Chargers was going to be closer to 5 years, $100 million. That's not where we're at, right? 82.5. You look at your Carlton Davis. His deal was 3 years, $45 million with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Tre'Davious Ward, who I think a lot of people thought was going to come in at where maybe Carlton Davis came in, and then JC was going to be even higher than that. Now, all of a sudden, maybe you could get that player for $12, $13 million a year. It seems like the cornerback market, for whatever reason, is not following suit with the wide receivers. Like, it's kind of silly because you have to have guys to cover the receivers everybody's paying, but that's not really where it's going right now. So I think that there is maybe more of a chance than I initially thought that Tre'Davious Ward could be in their market. He is definitely somebody that's better than the Jalen Millses of the world. He's not J.C. Jackson, but he's also better than those other guys, right? He's better than a Darius Williams. He's better than a Mills from last year or something like that. So maybe that's a direction, that a door that opens up a little bit more now for the Patriots, but certainly big shoes to fill with J.C. Jackson. I want to talk about the zone thing real fast. You mentioned that you didn't want to go to zone. My general feeling on it is that the Patriots don't want to go to zone either. I think that there are some things to be said for it. From a game plan's perspective, just like last year, there are times when zone is a better strategy against a certain quarterback. Like, there was a stretch there last season where the Patriots played a lot more zone coverage. When I brought it up to Steve Belichick last year, when they were in that stretch, in that 7-game winning streak, and he said everybody in the building wants to play man. We are a man coverage defense. Everybody here wants to play man coverage. We're not going to ever fully go away from being a man coverage defense. So as much as I understand why people think that they're going to have to play more zone just because they don't have the horses in the back end to play man and match up one-on-one against everybody, I don't think that that's going to be a full-time switch where all of a sudden we're going to be talking about the Patriots running a Seattle 3 system or the cover 2 or quarter structure defenses that Staley and the Rams run. I think we're going to talk a lot more about game plan, stuff like that they've always done, right? Like, I think that that's what we're always going to come back to. So, yeah, I think that there's a chance that we could see a closer to 50-50 split like we saw last year when it comes to zone coverage versus man coverage. But I don't think the Patriots are ever going to use a term that they often use with me. I don't think the Patriots are ever going to major in zone coverage. I think that it's always going to be something that's going to be in their bag, but it's not something that they're going to major in. And when they do play zone, it's going to be match zone anyway. So when you're playing on the boundary in a match zone coverage system, you're essentially playing man coverage anyways, right? Yeah, if the receiver runs under, you're passing it off. But if he runs any sort of vertical stem, you're playing man coverage down the field anyway. So I don't know how much of a difference it really makes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you explained it well. I get, again, there's a reason it's worth talking about, but I agree with you. And that's how it should be, right? But it just means it's that much harder to get the guys you want because there's more zone corners than man corners.
Yeah, it is. And we'll talk plenty about the draft. We've talked about a lot of the corners in the draft already, just in anticipation of J.C. Jackson leaving and now officially signing with the Los Angeles Chargers. And we've talked about the Washington DBs, Kyler Gordon, Trent McDuffie, Andrew Booth Jr. from Clemson. Kyer Elam certainly has rose up boards since the combine, since running in the high 4.3s from Florida. Another one. I know Florida DBs probably give Patriots fans nightmares, but that's sort of where we're going right now, I think, at the top of the draft. And then it's really presents itself. I think the biggest issue that I see with J.C. Jackson leaving is that you're now opening a gigantic hole in your secondary where you can't necessarily look for that wide receiver that everybody would love for the Patriots to add. So if you have to draft a corner with your top pick, with your premium pick, then how are you now going to get that upside wide receiver? We've seen today, Christian Kirk was sort of the first domino to fall, but the first domino of many of what we've seen out of this wide receiver market. I mean, it is absolutely nuts out there that Christian Kirk, who has yet to have a 1,000-yard season in his NFL career, is averaging a higher AAV than J.C. Jackson. Like, guy's making $17-18 million a year. He's never made a Pro Bowl. It's crazy. I reported earlier that Marquez Valdez-Scantling is thinking about in the $12 million range as a player that the Patriots have kicked the tires on. They did inquire on Cedric Wilson, which I thought was probably one of the best value contracts we're going to see all free agency. He's not a needle mover by any means, but just the fact that the Miami Dolphins got Cedric Wilson on reasonable dollars is something that maybe that was a wide receiver contract we would have seen 3 or 4 years ago. Now it kind of feels like that it's an underpay for a guy like Cedric Wilson, believe it or not. The wide receiver market is going bananas. And now you don't have the opportunity to use your first round pick on a wide receiver necessarily because you still need corners. So where do the Patriots go from here at wide receiver? Because now Allen Robinson, some of these other guys that are coming up, and I would also mention, even if you trade for somebody, that guy is going to immediately want a new contract because the contracts that are coming out now are just absolutely bonkers.
And the other thing I would add to that too, you know, they lost Ted Karras today as well, right? So you figure Michael Onwenu is going to slot in as the left guard. Well, Trent Brown's still a pending free agent.
Right.
So we don't know what's going to happen with him. Mike Reese over the weekend said he's leaning towards, like Reese himself, if he had to project, is leaning towards Brown signing elsewhere. It's another premium position. You might need to use a premium pick. Not a great right tackle class. Now, Marcus Cannon got cut today. Like, maybe they go that way, but is that who you want over there? Left tackle may be a need too with Isaiah Wynn in the final year of his deal. These are premium positions you need to add at. And the reality of the wide receiver position right now is adding there is a luxury. You have NFL caliber players across the board. They might not be top tier players, but you have NFL caliber players across the board. You have one NFL caliber corner on your roster right now with Jalen Mills, and he's more of a hybrid corner safety than a corner. Assuming Trent Brown leaves, do you have an NFL caliber right tackle on your roster? Well, Michael Onwenu, but now you need to add a guard, right? So it's like you said, it's catching up to them very quickly.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of time left. Brown comes back, boom, that right tackle issue's off the board, right? They signed, there are a couple right tackles out there. I don't think any of them, I got to pull up my notes here. I don't believe any of them have signed Morgan Moses, Riley Reif, Ifedi, Shell. Now there's some bigger money there, but we know they'll pay on the offensive line. I don't believe any of those guys signed. Correct me if I'm wrong. So again, this can, is all subject to change. But right now, as it stands, wide receiver is more of a want than a need. That doesn't mean they can't add to it, but it's more of a want than a need. You can go in with this wide receiver class again, NFL caliber across the board. You're going to go in with Yasir Durant as your starting right tackle, with Jawan Williams as your starting outside corner. That's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on this, especially with how deep the wide receiver class is this year in the draft. You can get somebody with some high upside, with some potential on in the middle rounds, right? A 3rd or 4th round pick on a wide receiver could potentially turn into a starter down the line, or somebody with some good upside down the line. And that's a situation where with Nelson Agholor too, I would argue that looking at what Christian Kirk got today and hearing some of the figures that are being floated out for the rest of this wide receiver market right now, the Nelson Agholor contract doesn't look as bad. It's still not good, right? But it doesn't look as bad as it maybe did 24 hours ago.
If they didn't overpay Nelson Agholor last year, they're overpaying Christian Kirk this year, right? It's that's basically what it is. It's a pick your poison.
Right, exactly. So that's a big thing, I think, in this situation to remember is Nelson Agholor's contract is still bad, but it's definitely not as bad as it could have been. And the Patriots are probably the one thing that I think the Patriots might have been a little bit ahead of was the fact that this wide receiver market was going to take off. Some people thought it was going to take off last year because of the COVID season and because of the adjustment in the cap due to COVID. It didn't take off in free agency as much last year as people thought. Now it's taking off this year. So Nelson Agholor this year probably makes double what the Patriots paid him last year, right? So,
and the other thing too, sorry to cut you off. The other thing, what did Kirk get? 4 years?
Yes.
5 years? 4?
It might have been 5.
4?
Yeah.
5? The point being, Agholor is 2. So that they didn't run this thing out with him, which I think also you're seeing some of the, and you saw it with Jackson too. The 5th year teams are now using, now that there's a little more, what's the word? Security in terms of the cap. Like a lot of the COVID stuff, in terms of what it's doing to the league financially, is in the rearview mirror. It's a lot more settled. It's not as volatile. That's the word I'm looking for. The cap situation isn't as volatile. I think what you're seeing today is teams are more comfortable than they were in 2020 and 2021, giving players longer term deals. Again, Aguilar too. The big deal today, I think what's ultimately going to be the big mistake wide receiver deal, Christian Kirk getting 20 something million a year, whatever. Or it's not 20, but it's like 18 a year, whatever it is. Or is it 20? That's 4 or 5 years. So sorry, I've been looking at a lot of numbers today. It's hard to keep online, but
it's tough.
I think that certainly helps.
Yeah. So like you said, it stinks. It's a bummer because I think wide receivers as a topic, as a discussion, we all love to discuss wide receivers. I love watching wide receivers, down wide receivers. But now with Aguilar, Bourne, and Myers on that RFA tender the Patriots placed on him, a second round tender, that nobody is really expected to sign him to an offer sheet at this point. That's going to be what Jacoby Myers is going to be back on next year. With Jacoby Myers and those three guys back, it becomes less of a number one need for the Patriots. It becomes less of a need that they can fill immediately this year.
It's a luxury. It's a luxury need.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Corner, linebacker, still to me are the two things that we have to talk about the most. We're going to get to linebacker a little bit later.
And tackle. Those are the three. I want to put that in there because I think it's I
want to swing it to the offensive line now. So Ted Karras signs this 3-year, $18 million deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. The Patriots came in at 3 for 15. Then they went down to 3 for 13. They end up losing the player, and he goes to Cincinnati at 3 for 18. So now the Pats are back in a situation where Michael Onwenu is your starting left guard, at least projected into next season. Trent Brown's an interesting one. He's a Rosenhaus guy. We know the Patriots have a great relationship with Drew Rosenhaus, and he's also somebody that has clearly played his best ball as a New England Patriot. So I think that there is something to be said here that Trent Brown could potentially stay put. He's not going back to the Raiders. Like, I understand they have a new regime. It's all Patriots guys. Carm Bracelo's over there too, the offensive line coach for the Patriots last year. But I just don't see whichever Davis it is now, Al Davis's son, right? Mark Davis paying a guy he just paid, right? And bringing him back for really any argument that Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels can come up with. So I think Trent Brown stays with the Patriots because this is where he feels the most comfortable, where he's played his best football. So that could potentially fill a hole there. But the optics of Justin Herron being a part of the starting equation on the line is a little bit shaky, especially at right tackle, where he has not been as good. When he's at left tackle, he's been okay. At right tackle, it's not been very pretty for Justin Herron. So now tackle becomes another part of this conversation, since we know Onwenu is probably going to kick inside.
Yeah, I mean, and you summed it up, well there. Unless they add, we're doing this one day into the off season, and there's still however many more days of free agency, and then the draft, and then the second stage of free agency, and like a lot can change, right? They could add a guard. They could add a guard tomorrow, and then Mike Onwenu's your tackle, and you're set. You're good. The offensive line is done. But I think the way you want to look at it realistically is go through the, we call it a 2 deep, which is essentially the depth chart, right?
Right.
What positions don't they have start? Put a red mark or highlight where they don't have a starter. Right tackle, either right tackle or left guard is highlighted right now. If whatever you want to do with Michael Onwenu. And that's going to be a need. That's going to be a big need. It's not going to be a cheap need to fill primary positions on the offensive line, especially if they're going to fill it at tackle. That's now a question. So you're optimistic, though, in Brown coming back, because I feel like most of the consensus thinking has been that he could go elsewhere and try to chase a contract. Yeah,
I'm pretty optimistic that he comes back because of all the things that he said during the season last year. And I get that money talks, and eventually the Patriots are going to have to shell out a competitive contract in order to keep him here. But the way I see it is that Trent Brown numerous times said that he personally feels comfortable playing for the Patriots. And that season that he spent with or 2 seasons he spent with the Vegas Raiders, he was in a pretty dark place with the Raiders. I mean, a lot of things were happening off the field for him too, with his brother and things like that, and his own personal health. And there were other variables that played into that. But I think for the most part, he felt like a fish out of water when he was in Vegas. And I don't see, even if he chases the money elsewhere, and money is obviously a great thing to have, I don't see necessarily him being 100% comfortable with being elsewhere at this point. And I do think that he would take a little bit more of a team-friendly deal. You have to remember the Raiders, they gave him a lot of guaranteed money on that contract he signed. So he's sort of already made that money, right? He's already gotten a bag once before. So it's not like he's never gotten paid. I think there is a chance that the Patriots could get Trent Brown to come back on a more team-friendly deal. Now, the indication, though, I will say, is with Ted Karras, they made it a competitive offer to keep Ted Karras. That might signal to you how they're doing in the Trent Brown sweepstakes, right? If they're going hard after Ted Karras, and they probably weren't planning on paying Trent Brown. So we'll see where they kind of pivot there. But I think other teams, based off of what happened last year, last couple of seasons with the Raiders and Trent Brown, are going to be really reluctant to give that player a big time contract, even a contract that spans multiple seasons like the Raiders did a couple of years ago.
So just to backtrack to something you just said, what does the Karras deal? What do we know about their pursuit? What does their pursuit of Karras mean for their plans going forward? I actually looked at it slightly differently. If they're pursuing Karras as hard as they did, does that mean they view Michael Onwenu as a right tackle?
They
could be the flip side of that. It could be, hey, if we get Karras and then Onwenu goes back to right tackle, we have our starting 5 in place. So that's how I read it. I think, what you said about Trent Brown too is they wanted Karras because they feel like, without him or they'd rather have him than Brown, whatever it may be. But I have no idea what they're going to do with Onwenu. I don't think we're going to know until the start of the season, but that's just how I read that. If we want to follow the tea leaves, the breadcrumbs, whatever you want to call it.
I will say it's probably a little bit easier, especially for a team like the Patriots that have such a good history with scouting offensive linemen. It's probably a little bit easier to find a guard than it is to find a right tackle in the draft. I think there's a chance that Dante Scarnecchia, who does still consult for the Patriots and do some scouting and on the draft side of things, could pluck a left guard out of the 6th round from Michigan, or someplace like that. And all of a sudden they got this player, right? It's that spot I feel like is a little bit easier for them to find somebody, starting caliber, solid guard. You could also look at, okay, they were offering 3 years, $18 million to Ted Karras. I haven't taken a long look at the guards available in unrestricted free agency, but they also could give a solid veteran stopgap starter a 1-year contract to come here and play guard for the Patriots as well. Maybe they view that guy as James Ferentz, but I don't think so. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of options there at guard and even at right tackle already on the roster, and I'm not too concerned with the.
Did your mic just totally? Did you hear that, or was that just me?
Maybe it's just you.
High pitched screaming. That's why I just twitched. I'm sorry. Anyway.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, that's probably all of New England right now, because apparently, based off the comments, everybody is ready to jump off the Tobin Bridge. So I can understand it, but like you said, Alex, I think last year kind of spoiled us a little bit about how things go with free agency with the Patriots. And as much as I don't want to carry the water for the team too much, let's also keep in perspective how many times the Patriots have let a cornerback walk in Bill Belichick's tenure in New England. And every single time people say that it's going to come back to bite them, right? When they let Ty Law come back or walk, and oh no, we're in trouble. They let Asante Samuel walk, and it's oh no, we're in trouble. And they let Malcolm Butler walk, and it's oh no, we're in trouble, right? The Patriots seem to find their level pretty much all the time when it comes to these things. And maybe they know something that we don't about giving that kind of contract to J.C. Jackson as well. I'm not going to speculate or anything, but maybe there's a possibility that they know a little bit more about the player than we do. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. The one thing I would say to that is So you mentioned a couple names there, right? They move on from Gilmore to Talib. They move on from Revis, Butler. They always had the next guy in place. The real comp is Asante Samuel. That is the situation that this mirrors best. And let's not forget, Samuel went on. He had an all-pro season in Philly. He then got hurt, but he went on. He still played well in Philly. Meanwhile, the Patriots went through their longest stretch with Brady without reaching a conference championship game. And those were the Hank Poteet teams, the Eric Moreland teams. Julian Edelman out there playing corner. Like that to me is the difference. I think you're right. I think in general, when they've moved on from corners, it's been the right move. Obviously, moving on from Revis when he did, just keeping that to 1 year worked out. Moving on from Talib when they did made sense. I would even say moving on from Butler when they did make sense. But you could even argue Gilmore, because they had Jackson and then Jalen Mills played well last year. There's no next guy. There's no next guy. There's no, that guy's not here. That's the difference. That's the difference in the situation. Now, if they go out and they draft it, like maybe they're watching Andrew Booth and they just know, hey, this kid from day one is going to be locked down in the NFL. If they pull that off, then this was the right move and we can revisit this then. But outside of that, I mean, there's no obvious next guy in place.
Yeah, it's never a good move to lose a 26-year-old Pro Bowler. Like that stinks.
Right.
It stings for everybody. It stings for people internally that they lost J.C. Jackson. But the point is, they have a value system. Other than last year, they've stuck to it. And until we see the next couple of dominoes to fall, we cannot overreact. Fans, if you guys want to go and overreact and yell at us in the chat and get all mad about it, then I totally understand. But for right now, you got to let this whole thing play out. And let's see what happens the next couple of dominoes to fall. Some of the additions, we talked about all the losses, with JC obviously being the big one and Ted Karras. The Patriots did lock up Devin McCourty. This came last night, right before Tom Brady announced he was coming back to the NFL and coming back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and right in the middle of Kevin Garnett's jersey retirement as well. So this was quite the timing for Devin McCourty, but they did bring Devin McCourty back on a 1-year deal worth a total value of $9 million. We haven't officially gotten the exact salary structure yet, but your reaction to the Patriots bringing back Devin McCourty, this one felt like a bridge too far, meaning if they also lost Devin this offseason, then now we're talking about a complete rebuild on defense, and that would have been, I think, a complete disaster.
Yeah, if they lost Devin McCourty on top of J.C. Jackson, I'd be with some of you in the comments talking about what are we doing? I saw somebody say 5-12. Like, if they lost Devin too, I might be on board with that. People underrate the value he brings. I don't think people understand how important that position is on this defense. For whatever reason, it seems like a bunch of people only watched the Houston game last year talking about how he can't play outside of that game. And look, he was bad in that game. I think he called it the worst game of his career. But outside of that game, he was a top 10 free safety in football last year. I don't know if he's top 5, but he was top 10. He's a very productive player. He's a good player. Getting him back when you're going to have a young, inexperienced secondary, guys new in the system, having that voice back there is big. Dante Hightower could leave too, so he's going to be your veteran leader on defense. It's a 1-year deal. The other thing is people are mad about the money. It's 1 year, $9 million. He had void years in his contract that were going to kick in, I think, on the 16th, right? Or whatever Wednesday is. Yeah. So by bringing Devin McCourty back on the deal they did, they actually opened up cap space in 2022. He would have cost them more to not play than it would to have him on the team, the way his old contract was structured. That at no point, it's a no-brainer. Yes, they didn't have anybody behind him. Yes, that is an issue. And they should go out and try to at least, take a shot in the dark on somebody this year who can maybe be the heir apparent. I don't know if it's Daxton Hill in the first round. That feels a bit pricey. I would just want to look at day 3 options. And if none of them hit, we talk about it being a primary need next year if McCourty ultimately hangs it up. But yes, getting him back for a number of reasons, a big, big deal. They got him at a good price. Again, they opened cap money by signing him. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
That was the right move through and through.
Yeah, so the most likely thing here that the Patriots most likely kick the void years down the road on this contract to keep that cap hit low this season. So now instead of his contract voiding on Wednesday, it most likely voids next year going into the 2023 league year. But the reason why the Patriots can do this is because Devin McCourty is either retiring or he's playing for the Patriots. He's not going anywhere else. So if he's going to come back, then next year this time, they'll just sign him to another one-year deal and then another one-year deal. And they'll just keep kicking the can down the road until he eventually retires. And there he'll have the dead cap from any retirement like any retired player would have. So the ability to avoid the dead cap hitting all the cap on Wednesday is a good thing for the Patriots. You also mentioned the player himself and Devin McCourty. To me, and I don't mean to sound like pretentious here, but like people that judge and watch Patriots games solely on the TV copy just don't really understand what Devin McCourty is doing back there because he's not on the screen half the time, right? And I'm not like saying that that's your fault. I'm just saying that the way that broadcast football games, free safeties that line up 15, 20 yards off the line of scrimmage are off the screen for 75% of the play or whatever it is. So McCourty is the type of guy that not only quarterbacks the back end, but he also protects big plays. He also leverages or helps guys leverage routes down the field. And essentially the entire coverage system that New England runs funnels through Devin McCourty. So that responsibility is so major that no rookie is really going to step into that role and be able to take it on. It's going to have to be something that they train a guy over a period of time to eventually take on, because you have to essentially understand the defense like a quarterback of the defense. Like you have to understand how all 10 other parts are funneling into the rest of the defense, because you have to understand your fit responsibilities against the run. You have to understand, what the pass rush call is, when the ball is going to get out, where the quarterback's reads are. There's just a lot of mental toll on a free safety in Bill Belichick's system, which is why he keeps on keeping on with Devin McCourty. If it was somebody that they could just put in and say, oh, this guy's going to play center field, no problem, then that would be different. But it's a lot more responsibility than just go out there and play center field. So that's a big reason why Devin McCourty is coming back. We also have Brian Hoyer re-signing with the team, Matthew Slater back with the Patriots next year. I think this is an interesting angle about maybe not so much with Hoyer, but with Slater and McCourty being two of the culture or kind of tone setters for this team. It is interesting that the Patriots are not ready to pass the baton to any of these younger players to kind of take on that leadership void that McCourty and Slater hold.
Well, I wonder if that you talk about not being ready to pass it on at those two spots. They don't really have anybody to pass it on to.
Yeah.
Specifically deep safety. I mean, Slater's a little different, although they honestly right now, Brandon King's a free agent. They don't have an obvious replacement at gunner. Most of their, special team specialists are interior guys. Cody Davis, Joshua Bledsoe is going to be a special teams guy. Like those guys play inside the formation. Those guys don't play on the outside. I guess maybe Christian Wilkerson would be the guy if Slater had decided to retire, the guy internally. I actually think Hoyer of those two, if we're going to talk about, leadership and veteran leadership, I went back this morning and I actually wrote about it on 985thesportshub.com. It's up there right now. You go back and you look at what Max said about working with Brian Hoyer. You look at what Bill Belichick said about having Brian Hoyer in the building. You look at what Josh McDaniels said about having Brian Hoyer in the building in that quarterback room with Mac. You look at what Hoyer himself said about that relationship. That's a very, especially with all of the offensive coaching turnover, right? All of the people who said when we were worried about who's going to be the quarterback's coach, all of the people who said just make Hoyer the quarterback's coach, you can't complain about the contract, because that's essentially what they did. Right. That's essentially what they did, and that's good. That's good. I think having him in that room is going to be very valuable. The other thing is, I know 2 years, $4 million sounds aggressive, right? The Cardinals paid Colt McCoy 2 years, $7.5 million, $6 guaranteed. So double, basically double what Hoyer got to play the same role. And the reality is, I think Hoyer may be more valuable to his situation than Colt McCoy, because you're investing in him for 2 years to work with the young quarterback. Is Kyler still going to be the quarterback of the Cardinals in 2 years? I don't know. Max should still be the starting quarterback of the Patriots in 2 years. If not, his development didn't work, and you're beyond that anyway. So they got Hoyer back for a very important role. He's not going to play a ton. Very important role. They got him back at what I would call half his market value based on what Colt McCoy signed. That was a big one for me.
Yeah, so Brian Hoyer has roots in the New England area. He built a house here last year. He doesn't want to play for anybody else but the Patriots. But believe it or not, and honestly, don't get it wrong, like Brian Hoyer has a market. Like there are people out there that would have signed Brian Hoyer. Teams out there that if the Patriots didn't get this done, that would have signed Brian Hoyer. Now, do I know for a fact that Brian Hoyer would have left New England with all of his family roots here? Not necessarily, but football season's only 4 or 5 months and you go elsewhere, your kids and the wife stay here, and then you come back in the off season and everything is all well and good. Players do that constantly, all the time. Not every player has their family with them all the time in the location that they're playing at. So it's not unheard of to go that direction. So all these cries of Brian Hoyer being a quarterback's coach, why the heck would Brian Hoyer want to be a quarterback's coach right now? He is a commodity that is in demand at a much higher salary for much less work and much less time in the building. Until somebody says to Brian Hoyer, until the NFL as a whole, all 32 teams say to Brian Hoyer, there is not a job for you in the National Football League unless you're a coach, then why the heck would Brian Hoyer ever agree to be a coach? I mean, like, I just don't understand this thought process of automatically assuming that Brian Hoyer would just agree to be the quarterback's coach. Like, why? Why would he want to be the quarterback's coach when he can just be on the roster and be an NFL QB with an NFL QB contract, even if it is as a backup? Like, he doesn't want to start nowadays.
I mean, there was a report this morning, shortly after he signed, that he wasn't going to take the minimum because he knew he could make more than the minimum. And people are surprised when this happens all the time. But you look at guys like Josh McCown, right? Colt McCoy, who just hang around the league forever and they don't really play, but they're there. That's because they're just valuable resources to have in the room. Hoyer's kind of hit that level. Like you said, teams aren't going to be worried about what he can do physically. Yeah, it's his value in that room. He's going to be in the league another 5 or 6 years, probably. I don't know how old is he? That might be a little much, but he's like he could play both years of the 2-year deal.
His rookie season
till he's 40.
Was 09, right?
So 09. I'm pulling up. He's 36.
36. Yeah.
He could play 4 more years. Would McCown play to 40, 41? 4 years. 4 years definitely realistic.
Like playing, so
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about Brian Hoyer. We talked about all these other signings, but obviously the news coming down here in a little bit over an hour ago, the Patriots are without J.C. Jackson. J.C. Jackson has moved on to the Los Angeles Chargers. The Pats now going back to the drawing board at cornerback, essentially outside of Jalen Mills and Jonathan Jones coming back from that injury.
Hang on. You want a breaking one here? This is actually interesting.
Okay.
This is from Tom Pelissero just now. DeMarcus Lawrence has become the first defensive end in NFL history to have 7 straight seasons of his contract fully guaranteed. He's got a new 3-year deal with Dallas, fully guaranteed $30 million.
Wow. Good player. I get it. I actually thought at this point that Chandler Jones would have signed by now because that dude is still a stud.
I thought so too.
This market has moved a lot. We talked about this earlier off the air, right before J.C. Jackson's news came out, and then Carlton Davis domino fell right after that. This market has been a little bit backwards. Like guys like Braxton Berrios are some of the big early day signings, right? And you see the offensive linemen like Karras and Kappa going to the Bengals. The first big contract was Christian Kirk, but there was a good 4 or 5 hours there before J.C. Jackson news broke where we were kind of going backwards. Like the low-level guys were getting their deals done while the big dominoes were still yet to fall. And typically speaking in NFL free agency, 1201 hits and Adam Schefter's got it in the draft. So, all the big-name free agents and where they're signing. As we sit here at 6:45, Allen Robinson still hasn't signed anywhere. The rest of the dominoes in the cornerback market still haven't moved. Chandler Jones is still out there on the defensive end market. I mean, there's some really big chips that are still on the board right now.
Well, I think what's happened is these middle of the market players, right, are jumping
great value
at these. Right. They're jumping at these massive deals. These middle of the market players are jumping at these massive deals. And what it's doing is it's driving up the top of the market guys. And they'll wait and they'll keep letting all these middle of the market guys take big money because their price is only going up further and further. You mentioned Chandler Jones. Why isn't Chandler Jones signed yet? I think one of the earlier signings of the day, and this was a thought I had, Hassan Reddick, right? Goes to the Eagles, 3 years, $45 million, 30 guaranteed. Well, and that's a good money for him. That's really good money for Reddick. Well, Chandler Jones should make more than Hassan Reddick. Those numbers are probably closer to what I thought Jones would get than what Reddick would get. So now all of a sudden, Jones' market totally shifts and teams have to adjust. So I think that's where this backwards order is coming from. And I think this might be a thing now. Like if I'm an agent, because you're going to make the most money off the bigger deals. I'm getting the smaller deals signed first to jack that price up. This might be a thing, which is interesting, but also kind of sucks because then you risk becoming baseball where the big name players don't sign until like days before the regular season. But it's interesting. It's an interesting pattern.
I think you hit it head on. And I think that the biggest thing is that because these big contracts are getting so big, a lot of teams are looking at it too. And I think this is how Bill Belichick looks at it, as frustrating as it is at times as a Patriots fan. And he says, well, I'd rather have player X at half of what player Y is making. So let's just get it done. Right. Like I would rather have the player at $9-10 million a year at a cornerback position instead of $18 million a year like J.C. Jackson. So why am I making this happen with J.C. Jackson? I think it's really interesting, though, how backwards this market has been this year and maybe some signs of things to come. But back to JC here for a second. A lot of angry people, Alex, in the chat. And I'm sure a lot of angry people in both of our Twitter mentions right now as well. And everybody in Patriot land, I'm sure if we turned on the 98.5 right now, Alex, everybody on the caller lines and things like that would be going nuts as well. I don't know. I don't want to sound like a Patriots apologist and come at it from that angle, but I guess it's where do the Patriots go from here? I think is really the only way we can. I don't want to yet take the flame and the flamethrower to the front office, right? Because it's still so early in the process. There's still a long way to go. But if you're the Patriots to replace J.C. Jackson, are you going out and using the money you were going to give J.C. to sign 2 veteran corners and trying to fill the gaps that way? Or would you really like to see them turn their attention to the draft?
Both. I'd go 1-1. I said it before. I'll say I think you draft. You're going to have to hit on a pick. And I know I say that and everybody kind of tenses up a little bit because, oh boy, here we go again. Right. You're going to have, because the reality is it's not like there's somebody waiting who's a year away, right? It's not like they need a stopgap for a year. If they had a young corner, like when Butler left, right? And they had Gilmore and then they had, J.C. Jackson. We didn't know. Yeah, decent first year. We didn't know if he was truly like a 70-80% snap guy or not. But it was like, you know what? If they can just get a 1-year stopgap, somebody to split the snaps, they'll be fine. They went out, they signed Jason McCourty. Like, that would be great, right? That'd be excellent. That's not the case right now. That's not. You don't have that guy. So I think you need to go into the draft, try to hit on a kid, and then you get a veteran on a 1-year deal, and then you reevaluate. Because the other thing is, and maybe this is wishful thinking here, and I'm going to throw a lot of what ifs out there. Like, this is very hypothetical, very everything going their way. If they hit on let's say they do that, right? They go veteran draft, call it Andrew Booth, Joe Hayden, because those have been the names that have been in my head all day. Let's say they hit it. Let's say they hit it, and Andrew Booth is amazing, right?
Yes.
Well, all of a sudden now you know what you're looking for.
Right.
So then what are the odds they could go back next year and hit again? So I'm not investing in any of these veterans in free agency. I just don't think it's that's the other thing about this. It's not a great class. If Carlton Davis was still out there, I'd be pounding the table for Carlton Davis right now. Give him essentially slightly less than JC's deal. If you have to give him 5 years, give him 5 years, a young guy. Right. I think what you do is you draft a guy, sign a veteran, don't commit. Sign a veteran, because if you have to go year by year at one corner spot, that's fine. Just don't end up going year by year at both. And you talk about signing 2 veterans. the class isn't there for that to work. The players aren't available for that to work unless they're going to swing something massive, unless somebody who we don't know is available suddenly becomes available. So I'm rambling now. Draft a kid, small commitment to a veteran, cross your fingers.
That's where it seems like we're at. And I think this is the biggest second guess of this entire thing from Bill Belichick's perspective with the front office and the decisions they made here with J.C. Jackson. They're no longer thinking progressively in my mind or forward thinking as much anymore than I would like to see, because the move here from the Patriots side of things was to franchise tag J.C. Jackson, right? That was the move. The move was to tag Jackson, allow him to play on the tag. You draft your Kyer Elam in the second round or late first round, and then you allow that guy to then take over for JC in 2023. It's okay that you don't want to give JC Jackson 5 years, $82.5 million. I don't think that anybody should have a real issue with the fact that the Patriots didn't want to go there. The issue that that people should have with the Patriots is that they did not progressively think about this hole that was about to be open, and now they're putting themselves in a situation where you're either going to have a young player starting and playing a ton of games, or you're going to have a veteran corner like a Jalen Mills, like a Rasul Douglas, like a Darius Williams, like a Kyle Fuller, whichever name you want to use, that's in over his head. At least one. And if you have one of those guys being your number one, and then Jalen Mills is now your number two, then two guys are technically in over their heads a little bit, right? So that's the biggest problem, or the biggest second guess that I have with this is the move. You knew J.C. Jackson was going to get paid. You knew you weren't going to be the ones to pay him. Fine. Then the move was to kick this can down the road to next season to buy yourself some more time, because you didn't draft a corner early last year. You paid Jalen Mills in free agency, but you knew he wasn't a number one guy. This offseason should have been the focus of, let's find the next guy behind JC, just like they did with Stephon Gilmore, right? They found JC Jackson. They developed JC. They made him into the next guy. I'm not ready to crown Shaun Wade. I don't think Shaun Wade is that dude, right? I mean, JC was at least showing early on with Gilmore how good he was. Like, that's not the guy. So now I think we're in a position where you are in a very, very tough spot going into the rest of free agency in the offseason, where you're probably either going to have a rookie in a very, very pivotal role in your secondary, or you're going to have a veteran player that really doesn't deserve to be the top guy on your depth chart being in that spot. And you all you could have done was tag JC, and you would have gotten him for a discount. Like, quite frankly, $17.3 million is a discount for J.C. Jackson at this point, and the Patriots didn't do it. And that's one thing I can't necessarily figure out. The only argument that I can make for the fact that they didn't do that is maybe they felt like that was tying up too much money in their cap, because when you sign a guy to a franchise tag and it's $17.3 million, he counts for $17.3 million against your cap. So that would have been it. They wouldn't have been able to do anything else at that point. I think that's probably going to be the argument that they make.
I think that could have been it. They didn't have many needs. You bring back, like, on top of that, what do you have to do? Bring back Devin McCourty, which I think they could have made work, right?
Right.
And then really,
Basically,
linebacker and tackle you can address through the draft.
Right. McCourty, Slater, Hoyer, which they could have probably done anyways. And then, as you said, all the other things get pushed towards the draft.
Right. And then, but then you talk about, tackle still maybe, if you swing it a certain way, maybe becomes a luxury need, at least for this year. Then linebackers, your only desperate need. You can bump wide receiver up. You kind of hit on it before. I do want to bring it up. We talked about this a lot when Gronk left, right? Replacing Rob Gronkowski, that there just was a lack of urgency for his departure, and they didn't draft a tight end for whatever it was, 10 years, something like that.
Right.
This is the bigger point for me. It's not a failure. Like, this was inevitable. It was a failing to prepare that set this up, in that, going back to the drafts, you said they didn't draft a corner high last year. They didn't draft a corner at all.
Yeah.
And they only had one UDFA. I get they had a bunch of veterans on the roster. I would have brought in they could have figured out a way to bring in a UDFA. The year before that, when you knew Gilmore was kind of on shaky ground, you didn't know if he was going to play 2021. They had, I think this is 10 picks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 picks. No corners. No corners. 3 linebackers, 2 tight ends, no corners. The year before that, Juwan Williams in the 2nd round. The year before that, Duke Dawson in the 2nd round.
I think that's probably where we can have the issue of where they missed on this, right?
So that's it. So they started missing. They started missing, and they just stopped taking guys. That's not like they needed to keep going. They needed to keep going. They just kind of shut it down and said, you know what, we're not going to add anybody. They could have taken corners on day 3. They have so much success developing guys at that position. Look at where JC came from. That just for them to not add, even as a UDFA over the last 2 years, right? So Jalen Mills is really the only corner they brought in the building.
They brought in Miles Bryant.
Miles Bryant, thank you, in the slot. Right. Yeah, Miles Bryant, you're right, correct. And then Sean Wade last year, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. You knew this day was they knew this day was coming for probably 2 years, and they didn't do anything to address it.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing for me today. Is you can second guess the Patriots if you want on the fact that they weren't willing to give that contract to J.C. Jackson, but that's not where I'm at. I'm second guessing the Patriots because they did not have the foresight to prepare for the fact that they knew that they were not going to pay J.C. Jackson, because this is a thing that started at the combine when they made that 3-year, $51 million offer to JC. They knew at that point in time that they were not going to match that market. They knew it right then and there that they were not going to be in the sweepstakes for JC, at least on a long-term deal. And they had until the other day to franchise tag him, right? They had until last Wednesday to place the tag on him. So they had that period of time to sit there and say, okay, well, we're not going to reach this long-term deal. We'll tag him. We'll bring him back next year. We'll play it out. We'll draft a couple corners, and then we'll have some guys in the back of the depth chart to then hopefully rise up a little bit more. And they didn't go that route. And that's the part of it that I can't really figure out.
Well, and this is something they were so good at in the past, staying ahead of these personnel things, right? Just when a guy left, there was almost always another guy there ready to go. And this is obviously there's just one other instance where that didn't happen. But one, it's kind of a unique position to have somebody ready and waiting. And they rectified it within a year. They did. So maybe they'll do that again at corner, but they only needed one guy. They didn't need 2. So it's, it's just something that to me is why it's so shocking. Like, I don't mean this to come off as me bashing them. It's almost just raw surprise, because this is something that, move on from the player a year too early, not too late, be prepared, next man up, all of that. Right. They've been so good at that for 20 years. And again, outside of Brady, which is honestly a unique situation.
Right.
This really feels like the first, when else have they lost, I guess Gronk, where they lost a player and just there was no clear in-house option next up. It doesn't happen here a lot.
Right. So this actually reminds me more, to go back a little ways, this reminds me more of Asante Samuel, because
like we said earlier in the show,
they tagged Asante Samuel, and we talked about this when it happened, when we did the tag show last week. The Patriots did tag Asante Samuel, and then Samuel walked the year after he played on the franchise tag. The 2007 season, Asante Samuel played on the franchise tag. When they allowed Asante Samuel to walk after the 2007 season, there was a dearth of cornerback talent really between 2008 to 2013, when they finally made that trade for Aqib Talib, or 2012 was the Talib trade, right? 2012.
I think it was 11.
It's 12. Deadline.
12, okay.
They made the Aqib Talib trade in 2012. So that team in 11 makes the Super Bowl against the Giants as one of the worst defenses in NFL history to make a Super Bowl. I think they were the 31st or 32nd ranked pass defense in the league that year, and they made the Super Bowl because of their offense. That time period, there was clearly a lack of, we had, guys like Sterling Moore and what do you say, Earthwind Moreland and whatever, these other freaking guys, Hank Poteet, Julian Edelman's playing defense at times, right? He's playing slot corner because of who they have out there. And we saw what it looked like. They couldn't get over the hump. Not even Brady and Gronk and that offense in 11 that set all sorts of records could get them over the hump against the Giants in the Super Bowl. And that's where it sort of feels like they're headed again, because they allowed Asante Samuel to walk for the same reasons probably they let J.C. Jackson walk today. I think in a lot of ways, Bill Belichick probably looked back at that Asante situation with J.C. and said, yeah, this is kind of a comparable player. This is kind of the same sort of deal. And here we go again. But I felt like they had sort of reinvented themselves where they went Talib, then they went Revis, then they went Malcolm Butler, then they went Gilmore, then they went JC, right? They had a guy really in place for the last decade, since 2012, that was ready to take that mantle, and they never really were without it. They were never without a number one corner throughout that stretch. And now we feel like we're going back towards that. And we've seen what that looks like. Even with Brady, he had a tough time winning with that kind of defense. And now we have to go down that road with a second-year quarterback. It is worrisome. It is why we have so many people in the chat that are freaking out right now, because we remember what those defenses looked like from 2008 to 2012. And then we also remember in 2012, when Aqib Talib got here at the deadline, how much of a difference that made. It made an immediate difference, right? The light kind of switched on at that point. Then they get Revis in 14 and they win a Super Bowl. So the lack of foresight, the lack of planning for this J.C. Jackson departure has put the Patriots back into a secondary where I feel like we're going to be right back into that 2010, 2011 Patriot defense, where that secondary was held together by duct tape. And it was not a defense that was Super Bowl caliber. They were getting carried there by the offense.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that does it for us here tonight. We're going to wrap it up there. Hopefully tomorrow we can come back on with some positive news about the Patriots and not be all doom and gloom with the fact that JC
again, it's a process. This is day one. It's a long off season. It's a process.
Correct. So we will talk tomorrow and we'll see what goes on with the Patriots tomorrow. We're still waiting. Obviously, they brought back Devin McCourty. They brought back Hoyer Slater, as we mentioned earlier, tendered Jacoby Myers. We're still waiting for the Patriots to potentially make a move here, right? Actually bring in somebody from the outside and sign a free agent that it wasn't with the team last year. We still haven't seen that, so hopefully we see that in the next 24 hours here or so, and we'll go from there. And like Alex said, it's a long way. It's a marathon, not a sprint, so let's not all jump off just yet. But we'll see you guys later in the week. We'll obviously keep it updated here on Patriots Beat and on Patriots Press Pass. If there is breaking news that is worthy of us cutting in live right away, either me and Alex or me and John Zanis will be right here on Patriots Press Pass to break down the move for the Patriots one way or another. And Alex and I will keep you updated here on Patriots Beat as well. But thanks so much for hanging out with us tonight, guys. Sorry it was a little bit doom and gloom. Obviously, a player of J.C. Jackson's caliber walks out the door. It's going to be a little bit of a, this is the way it goes, right? This is the way it goes with these types of cards.
Like if you watch this show, you know us. We're not trying to rag. We're not trying to be negative. We're not trying to, bash the team. Like we're just going to lay it out as it is. If it's good, it's good. And you'll come in and you'll call us bobos. If it's bad, it's bad. You'll come in and you'll call us haters. Like this is the situation as it exists right now. Long off season ahead. A lot of work to do. Like they're still going to add players. If they don't add anybody to the roster they have right now, then there's a lot to be upset about. They're going to add players. Everybody take a deep breath. It's nice out. Go outside. Go for a walk. Is it still light out? It's staying late. I think it's getting dark now, but everybody breathe. It's going to be okay. They're going to have a team. We're going to be watching football in September.
That's a good way to end it right there. So Alex and I will be back soon. We'll keep you guys updated on social media, on Twitter. Make sure you look out there. That's when we throw out those teases of when exactly we're going to be on and when time the shows are going to start and all that kind of stuff. So you can join us live or you can watch us on the re-air. It always lives on Patriots Press Pass or wherever you get your podcasts as well. So you can watch us there, listen to us there as well. But until next time, signing off for Alex Barth, I'm Evan Lazar. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you soon.